Okay, and Ger is going to start with the first session on field trips to an operational prison as a catalyst in bridging the pedagogical gap for criminal justice and sentencing students. So I'll pass over to Ger and look forward to this. Cheers, Ger.
Sorry. Thanks, David. Can you hear me okay?
Can indeed. Can now, Ger. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, David, and good morning, everybody. And I look forward to giving you the presentation for the next 12 minutes or thereabouts. So just to note that if anybody would like a copy of the slides, you can email me, and I'm happy to share the slides with anybody who wants a copy of the slides. So I'm just conscious of time. So if I, sorry, just have to, yes. So essentially where I'm coming from is I teach on the master's program essentially, and I wanted to find out to what extent could we bridge the gap between theory and practice. So much of the areas of teaching are essentially criminal justice and sentencing. So while we can teach the theory of criminal justice and the principle of sentencing in the classroom, to what extent, does this impact on students' knowledge and understanding? So that's broadly speaking where I'm coming from, and this is actually based on an MA thesis I recently completed on the area of teaching pedagogy and trying to bridge the pedagogical gap for criminal justice sentencing students, to give them a broader based knowledge and a deeper understanding. So just give you a brief background to set the context. This is the LLM MA in Human Rights and Criminal Justice Master's Program. So essentially the LLM is for law students who have a law background, and the MA, we can admit students from a non-law background. So essentially the cohort of students came from a law background who would have a detailed knowledge of the mechanics of law and the black letter law and so forth. But we also have students from cognitive jurisdictions such as sociology, history and so forth. So they were able to bring their own knowledge and understanding of their own disciplines to bear on the study of criminal justice sentencing. And that was particularly relevant to their own effective learning and understanding of the differences in criminal justice policies and so forth. So essentially every year I take students to, well, not at the moment because of the COVID restrictions, but in terms of trying to inculcate in students the gap between theory and practice. So every year I arrange field trips to a divisional police station, the Garda Training College, and also Limerick Prison. So I chose Limerick Prison because it's a very, very secure environment, and it's a unique opportunity to actually get access to an operation prison, to actually give students the opportunity to actually learn in action, so to speak, because they can apply their knowledge. And in terms of the term, I use the term field trips because initially when I started this research, I used the term student visit to a criminal justice institution, but it's more than a visit, because the experience, the active learning experience or experiential learning for students is actually it's very active. So students engage with prison officers and other staff in the prison, such as medical staff, but students also engage with prisoners. So students actually had the opportunity to meet prisoners serving different sentences. So I use the term field trips because it was very much interactive, and as I said, a unique opportunity for students to actually appreciate the application of criminal justice policies and practice. That's just to give you a background. In terms of what I was trying to do here, Ernest Boyer, in his research and into teaching pedagogy, you're probably aware of the competing scholarships, what he defined. So at university, as teachers, we're all compete with in terms of research, discovery, integration with other disciplines. Excuse me, we're frogging my throat this morning. The application of that knowledge and teaching and learning. So Ernest Boyer, recognized the competing scholarships, or I suppose competing demands on our time at universities and other third level institutions, teachers. Reflecting on this, Donald Schoen reflected on Ernest Boyer. He said, yeah, that's correct. That's part and parcel of the environment of third level institutions, the competing demands in our time, and trying to engage in research-led teaching and so forth. So Donald Schoen also I suppose built upon Boyer's competing scholarships, and Donald Schoen referred to this notion of reflective participatory action research, or the more common term is a new epistemology. In other words, we need a new epistemology, or a new way of knowing what students know and understand. So that's broadly speaking the theoretical background to my research and this presentation this morning. A new epistemology, a new way of knowing. So that's why I arranged the the yearly visits to criminal justice institutions, and also in particular why I focus on Limerick Prison, because as I said, it's a secure environment. It's a unique opportunity to actually get access to an operational prison, and to actually see, you know, how could I apply this new epistemology or new way of knowing what knowledge students have, and not only their knowledge but also their understanding. Can they apply their knowledge in different circumstances? Could they apply their knowledge during the course of the field trip itself? So that's just to give you a background. So in terms of law, because law is my discipline, traditionally law was taught about the casebook method, which was pioneered by Langdell, a former dean at Harvard Law School. So his approach was to actually read the judgments. You know, how are the courts actually deciding cases in action and so forth. Now that was very good to an extent. By the students were actually engaging with original sources in terms of the law in action, so to speak. But Lee Shulman warns of what's called pedagogical inertia. In other words, you know, learning through the case book or case method, for example, reading judgments that have actually gone through the superior courts, how the judges applied the law, and maybe how the appellate courts, you know, made adjustments. So this also, leading on from Lee Shulman's warning of pedagogical inertia. In other words, how we actually communicate these to students needs to, you know, constantly evolve and take into consideration different learners. You know, every learner, every student has a different way of learning. They may have their own hidden or visible disabilities, and I'm going to speak about UDL in a moment. So this is broadly speaking where I'm coming from in terms of the discipline of law, to try and understand where students are coming from. As I said at the outset, we've law students and non-law students, and also bearing in mind the diversity of students, you know, international students, for example, coming from different jurisdictions. So it was one of the benefits, I think, of the research, because of the diversity of students on the master's program, where we had domestic students, international students, non-law students, and students from various different law backgrounds. So it was a good, healthy mix of students that I had to work with. In terms of teaching for understanding, as I said, the whole purpose of this was to actually determine, in terms of, based on this new epistemology or new way of knowing, what students know and also understand. Essentially, students were given a purpose for the visit. So essentially, before the field trip to Limerick Prison, I brought in a number of guest speakers. For example, I brought in a local prosecutor, so he was able to give the, give the practicalities of the prosecution process. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm from my drum this morning. Excuse me. So the prosecutor was able to give a practical background to the prosecution process, and the prosecution process, for example, would ultimately result in a conviction and sentence. So therefore, what's the outcome of the prosecution process would determine the sentence to be imposed. In terms of the length of sentence, and that's one of the issues I'll discuss in a moment in terms of the outcomes from research with students in terms of qualitative data. But essentially, students are given a purpose. So they not only had a guest lecture from a prosecutor, but also from a judge of the Court of Appeal, who was able to speak to them about the from the perspective of judges in terms of how judges actually impose sentence and maybe calibrate sentence. So this also all fed into the actual environment of the prison where prisoners are actually serving their sentence. So students had not only the academic knowledge gained in academic seminars, but also they'd heard from practitioners in the area, so they had some practical knowledge as well before they actually went to the field trip. So in terms of teaching for understanding and trying to gauge what students learned and understood from the whole process, in terms of the pedagogical lens, the performance of understanding, I think, was key. So the generative topics in terms of what was contained in the module, what the module intended to actually teach students, and in accordance with module learning outcomes and the program learning outcomes, understanding goals. So the assessment methods clearly aligned with the the understanding goals in the module, the course outline itself. Performance of understanding and ongoing assessment. In particular, performance of understanding was key to the research, because students were actually able to apply their knowledge during the course of the field trip by engaging with prison officers, by engaging with prisoners currently serving their sentences, and also to actually see the prison environment. And I'll say more about that in a moment. In terms of the disciplinary lens of teaching for understanding, the purpose was clearly, I would think, the most important aspect which came to the surface in terms of giving students a purpose for the field trip. So therefore, in terms of the disciplinary lens, knowledge, students would have gained knowledge in the academic seminars and their own reading and discussions in classrooms. The method in terms of how so-called experts in the discipline actually think and so forth in terms of law, research methodology in terms of finding law, finding new case law, new changes and so forth, changes in the law and so forth. The purpose, I think, was key to my research, and which ultimately led to the research findings, which I'll speak about in a moment. So students, as I said, were given a purpose for the visit itself. That gave them a focus on purpose, so they're able to clearly benefit from the field trip to Limerick Prison. So essentially, the field trip itself was an active learning experience. As I said, I mean, for example, essentially the field trip was arranged at lunchtime from 12:30 to 2 o'clock, because that's when the prison is in full lockdown. So therefore, students were able to access most of the prison and most of the prison services. For example, in terms of sorry, David.
2 minutes left there.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to go on, so experiential learning and so forth. I'm just conscious of time, so I'll make the slides available to people. So I'm going to just fast forward. So in terms of UDL, all students were taken into consideration, different backgrounds. I'm going to fast forward to the outcomes. So we had a good, healthy mix of students in terms of female, in terms of gender balance and so forth, and different diversity of students. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to go to the some of the key themes that came. So one was the location, Limerick City, and this came from an international student from the United States. In the United States, prisons are actually in remote areas. So this was an issue that students raised in terms of, families could visit prisoners in prison and so forth. They don't receive, every day is a different menu, medical facilities, recreation facilities, low risk prisoners working. So these are all issues that students raise in terms of how this enhances their knowledge and understanding and actually change their effective understanding. Some of the comments from students, so the field trip helped me to get a deeper knowledge on the topic, and I could explain this slightly better. What really strikes me is the bang of the door in the prison, knowing that the prisoners cannot walk out. So these were some of the qualitative feedback received from semi-structured interviews. It has really opened my eyes. When I now look at sentences, I think to myself, the prisoners have done something wrong, and fundamentally wrong in some cases, but there has to be some bit of humanity in the way. So again, we see an example of effective learning here. We got to see how the prison works on a day-to-day basis with the daily routine of the prison officers and the prisoners, which gave me a deeper knowledge and understanding. I thought that was a really, really important bit of feedback. So they not only had their knowledge, but also understanding. They had to apply their knowledge in the operation of prison in terms of, as I said, engaging with prison officers, engaging with prisons, and asking questions and actually applying their own academic knowledge during the course of the field trip. Yes, I think it was great. It suited me well. I think it was a bit earlier in the semester, the more time to think. And this was one of the issues in terms of the timing of the field trip. It was in week 9 of the semester. In terms of, some students raised the issue, well, perhaps if the field trip was earlier in the semester, would it have informed our thinking? My own approach was that by having it in week 9, in the previous 9 weeks, the students would have gained a sufficient degree of academic knowledge, and also with the benefit of the court of appeal judge and also the prosecutor as well. So to have all that knowledge, so that's why I arranged the field trip for week 9. But it's just one of the issues that some students raised. In terms of themes and patterns, not long enough. We only had an hour and a half because the prison was locked down. Medical facilities. It wasn't. The experience was not as horrific as they thought in terms of the prison environment itself. It was a secure location, but also from my perspective, and just conscious of time to finish this point, it was very noticeable for me. I think in particular their effective learning was really enhanced by this, because before the visit, the students were kind of excited. This is a new opportunity, and you could see the expression on their face, their body language. After the visit, when they came out at 2 o'clock, the expression on their faces had changed. It was almost, wow, thank God I'm out of there. So I think really one of the highlights was the effective learning, in addition to enhancing their knowledge and understanding. I'm happy to make the slides available to people, and I hope this has given you some of the headlines, and I'm happy to have discussion during the question and answer session. And I hand back to David now, because I think we're just out of time, and I'm just conscious of time. So thanks very much for your attendance.
Perfect, Ger. Thanks very much. Very, very interesting example, and what an example of experiential